Here we have a small raspberry patch, and raspberries grow in a cyclical manner where the new canes will emerge. That fall, those first canes will produce fruit, and the following spring, that cane will then produce fruit a second time and then die. And so we have an example here, these older canes, where first year it sent up its first branch, then the second year it sent out lateral floricanes, and the fruit grew on these floricanes the second year. Once that second year growth occurs, the cane dies, and you can see where all this peely bark is. That's how you can identify which canes are no longer going to be productive. These are the first things that you remove when pruning raspberries. The other thing that you need to take into account when pruning raspberries is making sure that there's enough space in between each and every cane to allow for the sunlight to penetrate the raspberry patch. If you leave every single one of these new canes from last year, you'll find that the patch is so overshaded that you'll just get a little bit of fruit on the very tips where the vines are getting enough sunlight, but everything else will be shaded out. You'll probably get a lot of fungal diseases and other things on the interior of the patch, which will then compromise the following year's production. It's also important to make sure that as we thin some of these new vines, that we're making space for the next year's vines to grow up through the middle of the patch, because these will be removed. Next year's vines will come up through the middle of it. So here we have an old cane that you can tell has that peely bark, has a gray dull color. It's kind of brittle. Here's another one. That's a spent cane that's already produced fruit. And then we have this cane that's a younger cane that doesn't have any floricanes. This one is going to produce floricanes and produce fruit later in the season. And then some of these small spindly wheat canes need to be thinned out to make room for the new canes that are going to, during the summer, that are going to grow up through the middle of this and replace these primicanes. So what we're doing is we're slowly rotating through, pulling the old out. We're making room for canes that are going to be more productive later in the season, and we're making room for new canes to grow up through the middle. So we're constantly rotating through the old and providing the new. And my recommendation is, when I'm done with this, we should probably only have about one cane per foot. So there's quite a bit of space in between each one of these canes. I prefer the ones that are pointing up. Sometimes I'll take these canes, kind of get them propped up inside this structure. And this is not necessarily the best structure, but it's not a bad way to support the canes. There's lots of different ways to do it. It is good to have something to support the canes so they don't flop over. When they get heavy with fruit, they're going to lay on the ground, and then you run the risk of disease on the leaves, and then you get less fruit. And then also the disease will affect the new canes coming up, and it might make it so that you might miss out on a year of fruit production by allowing disease to take over kind of one generation. So again, I'm removing the old canes, removing the thin spindly canes. I'm kind of moving some of this stuff. So kind of in this specific patch, I'm kind of making a V to allow the sunlight through the center of the patch. Old canes, young spindly canes, removing the old, prop up some of these. And now I'll just finish up by removing these last couple of dead vines. Dead canes. The last couple of dead and spindly. If you have 2 or 3 good healthy canes coming out of the same spot, it's okay to remove a good healthy cane if you need to, if it's in the way. But sometimes I'll just kind of flare them out to make room. And then the final step is to just kind of tip back what's left. We don't want a lot of, so if you have canes that are 6 feet tall, sometimes we want to just tip them back to 3 or 4 feet. And that's basically it. I mean, this is a pretty young patch. You can see I removed quite a bit. There's a lot of air space. A lot of sunlight can penetrate the middle of that patch. And it's going to need a couple of years to fully develop. It'll get better and better every year. But this is basically it. So just in review, we are removing all these dead, peely, gray, spent canes. All of those get removed, no questions asked. Then we're gonna remove real thin, spindly canes that aren't as productive. These they don't have as much energy. They're not gonna produce as much fruit as some of the thicker, healthier canes, but we wanna just make sure there's about a foot of distance between each and every cane. And then the final step would be to tip back what's left and bring it back down to a manageable height so that you can harvest the fruit waist level versus reaching up or having to reach down. So that's basically it. Pretty simple. If you have any questions, go ahead and comment below.